Welcome back to the Hidden Why podcast, episode 1106, Exploring the Future of Media and AI with Alex Fink. Enjoy. Hey Alex, welcome to the Hidden Why podcast. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
I've got to apologize because my head's in two places right now. I thought someone else was coming on the show and I've been researching that and a little bit ill prepared for this, but we'll make it work, mate, and we'll have a good conversation, I'm sure. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope I'm a pleasant surprise. Let's put it this way.
You are. Austin, Texas, living over there at the moment, from Israel.
Yeah. Well, I was born in the Soviet Union, raised in Israel, lived in Japan for a bit, then in California for 10 years. Now I'm in Austin.
Wow, in Japan for a little bit too, huh? Whereabouts?
Well, I was half of the time in Tokyo itself, in an area called Ebisu, and half of it in a town called Okazaki, which basically has a castle, a river, and a Sony factory. And you can guess which one I spent most of my time in.
Okay. In the temple, no. So that's cool, man. I lived over there as well for a little bit. So yeah, great country. And Ebisu must be famous for the Ebisu beer, I assume.
Well, it does come from it, but it's basically one of the smaller areas inside Shibuya, if you're thinking in terms of prefectures.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So yeah, huge place. Cool. Well, look, thanks for coming on the show. You're the founder and CEO of OtherWeb, and it's basically designed to help deliver high quality content to the people that choose to use it. And I guess there's so much content out there today, it's hard to decipher what's real, what's not, what's good, what's bad. And I guess there's a whole heap of shit. So your idea here is to remove all that and give high quality content. What made you decide to start this, and how long have you been doing it?
Well, I guess it's a complicated answer. But for 15 years, I was building perception systems, cameras, computer vision, that sort of thing. And at some point, I had this crisis of conscience that I don't think the world needs more cameras. Why am I doing this? Like, it was good money, but I don't think I was making the world a better place at that point. And so I started thinking about what is the biggest problem that I see around me that I could try to ameliorate to some extent. And I noticed that everybody's around me is consuming junk, and that people that I used to consider well-informed are actually kind of clueless now. Like, they can't make sense of it all because there's so much stuff out there. Even my parents, and my parents are people who figured out what was true even in the Soviet Union, right? By listening to Voice of America and things like that, right? Today, they're sending me articles and I have to tell them, nope, that's fake. Nope, this news source doesn't exist. This website was created last year. It cannot possibly be what it pretends to be, right? They're just not equipped to handle it all. So I wanted to create some solution to at least make it easier for people, help people filter stuff out with less effort than an editor would have to spend to actually edit the stuff.
I love it. What I want to ask you is, you get to a point where you're doing something like you said, you were making cameras and you felt like you weren't benefiting the world. What goes through one's head in that situation? Because I reckon there's a lot of us that do things that we go, what, is this actually doing any good? But to make the change and to do something different has got to be the hard task. What went through your experience then?
Well, it was certainly not an immediate decision, right? It was sort of a gradual realization that I'm doing something where, and especially because I was running a technical consulting company. Yeah. So generally speaking, smart companies didn't need me. The kind of companies that hired me were companies that were already in trouble in some way and they needed help, right? And so I have a few customers that I really like, but I also had some customers where I wasn't working with the A team, right? And I was basically fixing everybody's mess. Right. So I wasn't enjoying the process. Some of the products I built were really cool, but some of the products were downright, they went against my values, right? They were recording every face, every license plate, and then placing people in time and place, so that basically creating a surveillance state. And that wasn't something I enjoyed particularly. Yeah. And in general, if you think about it conceptually, I was creating a lot more information. And our problem is not that we are not creating enough information. Our problem is that we're failing to make sense of it. And so I kept thinking about it for a long time. I kept talking to people. And at some point I had a conversation with my wife and she said, well, you seem unhappy. What do you really want to work on? And I described this crazy idea of trying to filter the world's information ecosystem. And she says, well, why aren't you doing it? I said, well, because if I try to do that, then for the first 3 years, I'm not going to make any money.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
her next question was, well, can't you afford not to work for 3 years? And as soon as she gave me the green light, I went for it. Right. But
Wow.
I had to
What a
have
great
her
wife.
buy-in because, yeah, well, I think so too. Not sure I deserve her sometimes, but in general,
Sure you do.
it's something where it clashed with my responsibility as a husband, as a father, right? So I needed the okay from other people who depend on me before doing something crazy like that. But
100%. Mm,
ultimately, it seems like a good decision. Like we're growing fast, we're worth a lot, at least on paper. So life is good.
that's
One day
good.
I'll start paying myself too.
So a leap of faith. So did you obviously you've gathered the information, did your research and got the support from people around you? All very valid points for people listening out there. Did you start the business, Other Web, prior to exiting the previous job? Or did you say, look,
Yes.
I'm closing that door and just starting full on?
Well, I had a bit of an overlap, and
Yeah.
in fact, the company had two different names prior, right?
Uh-huh.
So because it pivoted a few times, but ultimately, when the current iteration launched, the month when the website launched, which was August 22, that's when I stopped doing consulting work in the camera space.
Hmm.
But the company was registered in September 21. So essentially, there were 11 months during which there was already a company. I was already doing work and investing money and hiring other people to do work for me as well. But I was still consulting on the side and making some money on that. But when the platform launched, we started having users, user growth started going up. At that point, I needed to be all in.
Nice. Did you start was it a crowdfunded company or was it a public listed company?
Oh, so we are a private company, but we actually did a crowdfunding campaign. We still have one ongoing. So
Hmm.
instead of a couple of big VCs, we have 2,150 small investors in the company with an
Nice.
average check size of like $900.
Yeah, that's good. Good way to do it.
Yeah.
What's your advice
Well,
on doing a crowdfunding company?
well, first of all, figure out if that's what you need to do. In our case, we had a very good reason to do that, which is we didn't just want the money, we wanted the community. We wanted people that we can ask, what should we build next?
Gotcha.
Things like that. That was probably the primary mover because I think naturally I'm not very good at building communities. Nobody else in the company is either. We're kind of a bunch of nerds, right? And so that was a way for us to solve that particular problem we had. Now, in general, if you figure that this is the right way for you, then pick a platform, figure out what you have to offer to the world. Make sure that you actually have a good product and a good story because otherwise nobody's going to invest no matter how good your process is, right? You want people to invest in a good company, so you need to offer them one. And beyond that, just remember that they're not donating to charity, they're investing.
Hmm.
And so you have a click funnel, not a GoFundMe, right? You need to advertise to get the eyeballs there. They're not going to come by themselves. And you need to make sure that you're offering them something worthwhile.
Yeah. Yeah. Congratulations to you. So this idea of other web and giving high quality content, how do you see media and its place in the world today?
Well, we've had the trend of the past 20 years, which is what I'm trying to reverse to some extent, which is that if most content is monetized through ads and most ads pay per click or per view, then over time, everything drifts towards clickbait because that's the only selective pressure, right? Basically, if you don't turn your content into clickbait, you just get less clicks, so somebody else wins. But they turn their content into clickbait. So we've been seeing this for 20 years. And this trend in itself is scary enough, but now you have a second trend that is probably going to collide with this one, which is that as AI gets better at writing, like maybe it doesn't know what to write about, maybe it doesn't know what is true and what is false, but it is getting really good at writing. So if you give it a fact pattern to describe, it will describe it really well.
Yeah, I wondered this.
Yeah. This is going to basically change the entire ecosystem because at some point we have to realize that if you have 100 articles, the cost of producing the 101st is zero. It doesn't cost anything if AI is good at writing, right? Whereas with humans, it used to cost at least 2 or 3 hours of writing and editing and things like that. So in a world where the marginal cost of written content is zero, do you still need publishers? Do you still need distribution or search engines or things like that? everything changes, and I'm trying to make it so that it changes for the better. But it's not trivial, right? There are ways in which this could go wrong. Like, for example, in that world, who pays for investigative journalism? It's not clear, because the investigative journalist just uncovered a bunch of facts, but who's going to read his own or her own write-up of it if we can create 100 identical articles, each with a different language so they don't actually plagiarize each other,
Yeah.
but describing the exact same fact pattern?
How do you gather information that's high quality? Like, how do you discern between what's true and false and what's high quality and what's not?
Well, generally speaking, we look at the language of the article, because our built-in assumption is that, first of all, you can't rely on the source, because some sources are all over the place. They have good stuff, they have bad stuff, there's variance, right? I tend to use the Washington Examiner as an example a lot, because on average, it's pretty terrible, but the news section is actually pretty good. There are good news articles there. It's just the editorials and the op-eds and all of that stuff is really low quality, right? And you have these outlets with large variance, right? Even, well, the New York Times obviously has great investigative work that nobody else can afford to do, but then they also have completely idiotic things in there. I can send you examples where, I'm not sure this would pass editorial review in any other decade other than this one, right? But it's just not journalism, right? So they all have variance. We tend to ignore the source. We tend to look at the article itself and try to evaluate it on the merits. And within that article, we operate under the assumption that we cannot discern whether something is true or not. Like, if you say there's a lion in your kitchen right now, I can't break into your house and try to take photographs. I have to just look at how you present that argument. Do you provide enough evidence? Are there external sources? Are you just saying things that are the minimum factual information required? Or is there a lot of sensationalist language, adjectives, adverbs that aren't necessary, etc.? Right? So most of our filtering is form-based, not fact-based, because in a general sense, we cannot establish whether something is factual or not. And by the way, this is something that peer reviewers do as well, right? If you try to publish a paper, says you started with 17 mice, did X, Y, Z, and now you have 12 mice at the end, the peer reviewer isn't driving to your lab and counting the mice, right? They're just looking at structure of the experiment, what data you provided, whether your write-up provides all the coherent description of everything that happened, etc. So we do roughly the same thing, but with journalism.
So you do it as like as a person reviewing each article, or do you use AI to do it all?
Everything is done by AI.
Wow.
The only thing
This
that includes a human in our process is the daily newsletter that people get by email, because AI is good at a lot of things, but it's not good at figuring out what will interest people. And so selecting 10 articles out of the thousands we have every day, that must be done by a human, right? Everything else is software and AI in our platform. So it's completely humanless.
Very efficient. How can you rely on AI to decipher whether it's, I mean, obviously you teach it language and you teach it what to look for, I'm imagining.
Well, so our approach is, well, we don't teach it language, right? It's a transformer, so it already knows language in some sense. What we try to do, and again, here we are different from the generalist guys like OpenAI and Google, etc. We try to make smaller models that are trained to detect one particular trait. So is this headline clickbait or not? Is an example of a model that we have. It is not as good as a human editor at determining this, but let's say it's 97% as good. Right?
So if it's clickbait, if it's considered clickbait, is that then washed away?
Well, it gets penalized by a few points, right? Okay. So you can think of an article score as 100 minus all the bad stuff we
detected. So you got different measures to score whether it's
right. Okay. And one of the first things that we rolled out before we even had a platform was a nutrition label for articles, with basically everything that we were able to measure about it, just like you have a nutrition label on food products that says how much protein, how much carbs, how much calcium it has, things like that, right? Not all of it is good or bad. Some of it is just useful for you to know. But we started measuring everything that we could about content. And then based on that, we also tried to estimate a score. Now, it's worth mentioning that score only works within a certain context, right? So if it's a hard news article that is supposed to tell you the facts, our score makes sense because we essentially penalize things that are too opinionated or too sensationalist. right? But if that article is supposed to entertain you, then don't look at that score. It makes no sense, right? We don't measure entertainment value. So all scores are good within context, but you shouldn't use them out of scope.
Right. So AI is complicated, huh?
Well, life is complicated, and we took on a part of life that isn't exactly objectively defined, right? You can't define content quality even within the context of news. All you can do is try to estimate things that most people would agree on, and then find as many of these as possible and try to add them up somehow.
Right. Do you think AI, once there's more and more AI articles and news and things being created out there, that it could just create this whole new level of false information? Because if there's so many people using AI to create all these false clickbait articles, and AI then relies on those to create its information and knowledge, then how can we then, like in 10 years down the track, where are we going to be?
Well, that's one of the ways in which it could go wrong. And you're already seeing this right now. If you go on Google Scholar, which is where peer-reviewed papers tend to appear, right? And you search for phrases like, as of the date of my last knowledge cutoff, which is something that only ChatGPT would use, you find hundreds of hits, which means people use ChatGPT to generate a whole bunch of work that was submitted to scientific journals. And you can bet that the next version of GPT, whether it's GPT-5 or something, will consume that as input and learn from its own hallucinations from the past generation. So that's obviously a way in which it could go wrong. And if AI learns from the hallucinations of a previous iteration of AI, that's not a good idea.
When you say hallucinations,
approach,
just clarify what that means for the audience.
Okay. All right. So what most people know as AI right now, ChatGPT, etc., that's basically a particular type of natural language processing model called the large language model, right? And these are trained in an unsupervised way, meaning nobody annotated the data. They're just fed a large amount of data, usually on basically the entire web, everything they can crawl, right? And they learn to infer stuff. And then after that, there's typically a step of reinforcement learning through human feedback, where it's asked questions, it produces a bunch of answers. Some group of humans, typically low-wage people in some third world country, right? I think OpenAI used Kenya for the most part, students, if I remember correctly. They tell it which of these answers they prefer, and it learns to please the human users in some sense. That's how you get a system like GPT-4, which is now the basis of ChatGPT, right? There's a few problems with this approach.
Yeah.
The first obvious problem is that it learned from the internet, and most of the internet is junk. Therefore, it learned some things that are just not true. And over time, people see it, give wrong answers, and they try to correct it, add guardrails, etc. This is why these models tend to be slightly more stable after they've been out for a while than when they just launch, right? But still, that's one type of hallucination. It will say something that was an April Fool's joke, right? Somebody just made a joke on the internet. There was no information to counter that. The model decided that is true, and it will then regurgitate that in a future answer. Another way in which they hallucinate is that the way these models work internally is they predict one word at a time. So you basically give it a question, you say answer, colon, then it guesses the first most likely word, the second most likely word, then the third, right? One word at a time. There is no overarching plan for what the answer needs to say. And so the longer the answer is, the more drift there is because the error tends to compound. So if you ask it to write 1,000-word article about something, then towards the end of the article, it might say things that don't even quite match what it knows about the world.
Right, that's interesting.
And so
one word at a time.
The drift tends to compound. Well, that's kind of the amazing thing about it, and that the LLM structure is something nobody would have guessed, or maybe a few really smart people did. But if you were to show it to me 5 years ago and say, this will be the smartest model in the world, and people will not even know the difference between something it wrote and something a human writes, like I would have laughed that person out of the room, because a model that all it does is predict one word, how can that possibly be considered intelligent? But it turns out if you make it large enough, if you feed it enough data at the trading stage, it becomes pretty good. But still, it hallucinates in some ways. And I think that in the future, we'll have AI that avoids these problems by planning the answer, maybe having some sort of a logic on top that applies knowledge of the world in general and then plans the answer accordingly.
Yeah, right.
I know that Jan LeCun, the head of AI research at Facebook, works on that a lot and talks about it every time he speaks in public. So I hope that will improve. For now, our approach is basically don't let an LLM riff, right? You have to constrain it. You have to only use it in a way that says, okay, here's a bunch of data. Write the best article you can, using only these data and nothing else. Don't make anything up. Don't use your prior knowledge except on how language works, right? Don't deviate from this. And then the writing tends to be good.
Good tips. Good tips. So when you say LLM, that's large language model?
Yes.
Okay, so you're saying when you ask it a question, it's using word by word. It's not actually creating a full answer, and then it's just going word from word based on its understanding of our language model.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, the way it was trained is basically it was given corrupted sentences with one word missing, and it was guess what is the missing word. And then the way it generates an answer is you always make the last word the missing one, and then it always just guesses that one word at a time.
Wow. Interesting. I'm gonna have to play with that. That sounds like fun. So with other web, what are you hoping to achieve here? Obviously, high quality information and more informed people, because I don't know. I look at media these days, and there's two worlds of argument that I have with people. And one is, you watch general news channels and things like that, TV or whatever it might be, radio. The stuff that we're used to. And then you get all these other different channels now, like you got socials and you got podcasts and different people putting out different information. And it seems to be that there's two walks of people. One that believe, well, you can't rely on social information or podcasts. I mean, who's this guy to be talking? And see, I'm one of those people that love podcasts and love listening to people and their ideas and their talks. And I switch off the TV. I typically don't listen to TV or radio because it seems too mass produced and clickbaity to me as well. Whereas other people would say podcasts and socials are all clickbaity. What's your argument there, and how would you bring peace to that divide?
Well, I'll say there's a kind of a more scientific approach, which is, first of all, there's no black or white, right? Everything is a probability, right? And within each one of these media, you have a probability distribution of some sort. So podcasts, some of them are the best information sources in the world. But on average, podcasts are actually bad because there's so many bad podcasts, right? So when we did our own studies of basically asking a few thousand people, what do you mostly consume? Do you spend more time or less time than you did 5 years ago trying to read the news? Do you feel like you know more about the world, or do you have a hard time figuring out what is true, what is false? We found that on average, podcasts and radio are actually about the same. But it's just that podcasts have a lot more variance, right? But the most informed or the least misinformed people tend to be the ones who consume news aggregators, right? Like Other Web, but not only Other Web. There's quite a few good ones out there. There's allsides.com, Real Clear Politics, apps like this, right?
So
those are the people who tend
the most least informed,
the least misinformed. So
the least misinformed.
So like the ones who are not as bad, like obviously it's been bad for everybody, right? But generally speaking, the least bad thing you can do is find an aggregator that takes information from many sources. Right. Those tend to do well. Oddly enough, people who read print media are still doing reasonably well, because even though we tend to complain a lot about printed media, it's regressing slower than other channels. Like cable news and radio are becoming worse much faster than print media is becoming worse. So again, nobody has an easy life right now. We're all spending a lot more time, and we have a much harder time knowing what is true. But probably the best thing that you can do is find yourself a good aggregator that you like, or some other third-party tools that you could use as a heuristic to figure out whether something is true or not. Social media is terrible, but that's the one thing we can all agree on.
Okay.
That there is the benefit of immediacy, right? Twitter is where you find out the news first. But the problem is that 99% of what you find out is just fake, right? And so, yes, you found it out quickly, but can you trust it to be true? Absolutely not. It's mostly nonsense. And so I would caution people against assuming that Twitter or Facebook or TikTok are a source of news. They're a source of something, but mostly it's a dopamine hit of some sort. That's what they're supposed to give you. Outrage, some other emotional splash, but that's it.
Yeah, okay. Good advice. How are you going to stop, other web from becoming like everyone else and maybe starting to put out clickbait and information that's maybe not true?
It's a hard question that we've been struggling with from the beginning. So one of the things that we did early on was register as a public benefit corporation. So instead of what the C Corp has, which is a single fiduciary duty to maximize shareholder value, we have a second fiduciary duty to maximize our mission, and our mission is to improve the quality of information that people consume. So both of those are binding on me and on every other person in the company. And we have to balance that in some way and keep an open record of how we are balancing that in some way. So that's binding our future selves to some extent. Another way that we've been doing from the very beginning is every time we roll out a new model and it starts being used in a stable way in the app, we open up the source of the model and the data set that we use to train it, right? Not for others to reuse, but for others to audit, take a look at the code, make sure we did not cheat in some way. And again, that is binding our future selves, because if tomorrow somebody who isn't me is the CEO of the company and they decide, why don't we make all the models right-leaning and punish left-wing content or something like that, right? Or the opposite, then there will be no way to keep this decision hidden. Either they will have to change the model and everybody will see, or they will have to close the source of the model and then everybody will see that moment, right? And they will know that something's up. So that is another attempt to bind our future selves by saying, no, we can't do underhanded things. It will be visible to the world.
Okay. Do you think there's perhaps too much information being delivered out there now and people are just overwhelmed and that's creating confusion? Or do you think it's just too much wrong information?
I think it's the signal to noise ratio. That's kind of what counts, right? So I don't think there's too much information as long as you have a system in which the good stuff percolates to the top. But the system that we have right now doesn't reward quality, right? As I mentioned earlier, there's pay-per-click and pay-per-view. There's no pay-per-truth or pay-per-quality, right? And so the wrong stuff ends up spread most widely. Like I remember an old graphic from 2016 where somebody looked at the most shared articles on Facebook, and the number one with 800,000 shares that year was "The Pope endorses Donald Trump." Now, that's not intentional disinformation. Nobody wanted people to actually believe that. It was just the thing that got the most clicks. And so we have a system that rewards clickbaitiness and it doesn't reward high quality. If you look at the last time something like this happened, well, you have to go pretty far back, right? But you had the invention of the printing press, and you went from having essentially a single publisher in Europe to having hundreds of publishers in Europe. And for the first 200 years, it was chaos, right? You had books that launched the witch hunt, like Malleus Maleficarum, right? That created essentially a movement that murdered 80,000 people, right? You had inquisitions, you had 52 religious wars all over Europe. But then eventually we got a new system out of that as part of the Enlightenment, right? Where good content ended up on top somehow. You had the social net of people doing peer review of each other, editing each other's content, trying to disprove each other's claims, and somehow at the end we got knowledge. So I think we need to develop a new system like this that is able to cope with this new, larger amount of information that is being created, because otherwise we'll end up believing nonsense that gets shared on Facebook.
Do you think that's the way that we might see the future of information and news play out over the next couple of decades as a transitionary period? I mean, we're already seeing it.
Well, I'm hoping it will take less than a couple of decades, because I don't know if we survive a couple of decades. So this is in part what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to accelerate the transition towards whatever the new enlightenment might be. But transitions tend to be painful. As I mentioned, printing press, 200 years of religious wars, right? Radio in the 1920s and 1930s didn't end well either. So every time you have a new communication medium, bad stuff happens for a while, and then things get better.
Mhm.
But we need to try to shorten that period in which bad stuff happens.
So do you see a demographical divergence between those that look at one particular type of media compared to those that look at others? And I might just say those that read the newspapers and those that are on social.
Yeah, the younger people are, the more likely they are to cite social media as their primary news source.
Okay. There's a problem there, I think, wouldn't there be?
Yes.
If the younger people are the
Absolutely.
future of the world and they're the ones driven by potentially false news.
I'll give you an even crazier one, which is that, first of all, if I aggregate across all news sources, more than 80% of people, both left and right, agree that consuming content from both sides is important to be well informed. And yet more than 60% of people say, but we only consume content from one side. Again, both left and right. So they all agree that it's important to consume it from both sides for others, but not for me. And the younger people are, the less likely they are to say either, to say that first thing, right? So younger people consume content from social media, and they don't even say that it's that important to consume it from both sides. They're fine just sticking to what they like.
Right. Interesting. So I wonder how that's going to play out, and then how AI is going to have an influence in that too, because obviously as AI gets more powerful and more available to be used by those that want to use it, then are we going to see a huger amount of false information being created in that domain and more people using that, and therefore, again, like you said, maybe creating some sort of upheaval in the world and outrage and violence.
That is the risk that essentially, like think about the 90s when spammers became really good and started creating a lot of spam. We had to develop spam filters. Otherwise, our inbox would be completely unreadable. So if AI starts producing a lot of junk, or let me rephrase that, if humans who use AI will be able to produce a lot more junk than humans who didn't use AI, right? Because that's really what's happening. Somebody was creating 15 clickbait articles per day, now they're going to do 1,500. So we need to develop better filters. That's a part of what we're trying to achieve. But besides this, since AI will be creating both good and bad content, we need to also develop ways to create better content as well, and maybe control this entire ecosystem from production to distribution to consumption, so that people know what they're consuming and where it came from, and they no longer have to click on whatever shouts the loudest on Twitter.
Yeah, right. Interesting stuff. Fascinating world, mate. And you're doing some good work there. So keep it up. Otherweb.com. People can check it out there. And I suppose you've got the app you can get and start consuming some high quality content.
Yep. And if you have any comments, complaints, you want to give some product feature ideas or anything like that, email me at alex@otherweb.com and let me know.
Alex@otherweb.com. Okay, cool.
Yep.
Alex, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Guys, check it out there at thehiddenwire.com. Until next time, peace, passion, and purpose. Thanks, guys, for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed what you heard. I hope you love what you're hearing. If you like this episode, guys, or any of the episodes that you're listening to here at The Hidden Why, please do me a favor by sharing it. You can share it with your families, you can share it with your loved ones. You can do that by using your favorite social media channels, using the icons on the platform that you're listening to The Hidden Why podcast. Also, guys, if you're a fan of the show, please connect with me. Connect with me at thehiddenwhy.com. I love to hear from you. I love to converse with the people that listen to this show to find out what they enjoy, what they don't enjoy, and perhaps if they have any questions or feedback for the show as well. You can stay up to date with all that I'm releasing here, guys. I do a solo show every Monday, a 3-minute thought every Thursday. I do 2 interviews a week on a Wednesday and a Saturday, and a book review every Friday. You can stay up to date with all that by subscribing to my newsletter at thehiddenwhy.com. Just enter your email address there, and also subscribing to the podcast on the platform that you choose to listen to your podcasts. You can also support the show, guys, by using the Amazon links at thehiddenwhy.com. So if you like books, you can get all the books that I review there, and anything else really that you like to purchase through Amazon. So use that link and help support the show. And we've also got a deal with Audible, guys. Audible is a fantastic way to listen to all your favorite books. We've got a deal with them so you can get 2 free books when you subscribe, or subscribe to a 30-day free trial. So check that out again at thehiddenwhy.com. Guys, that's it from me. You know what to do. Go out there, breathe more passion into every single moment. Do everything with greater purpose. And in doing so, you will discover your hidden why. This is The Hidden Why. My name's Lee Martinuzzi. Until next time, peace, passion, and purpose. See you soon.